And now a word from our cafe kangaroo.
Welcome to Blind Cafe's Naked DJs podcast, where every day we expose ourselves to the very best music. Some days we like to shake it up, some days we let it all hang out, and others we just like to stick it out there for you to listen to.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Naked DJs podcast by Blind Cafe Radio. I'm your host for today, Curveball, and this is the podcast where every day we expose ourselves to the best of music, all for you. We got a wonderful show for you today. What we're going to be doing is three of us, including myself, are going to be going over an article that we picked, something in music, and we're going to have a discussion about each of the articles. Who wants to go first?
I'll go first. I'm Dr. Johnny Love, and we've all been asked the question once in a while, what was our favorite decade for music? What decade had the best music? Some people say the 60s, some people say the 70s. The young kids today will say 2000s. Silly. I used to always say that the decade I thought had the best music was the 70s because that's the decade I grew up in. But lately, a friend of mine asked me that, and we were having a serious chat about it. And I got to thinking about it, and really, the 60s were the best decade, in my opinion. Why? Because that's when we had the British invasion, and that's when we had all the bands, Stones, ZZ Top, Beatles, Led Zeppelin, could go on, but that's just my opinion. So I'm just kind of curious. What's everyone else's opinion here? What do you think was the best decade for music?
As for me, the hair bands, it's got to be the 80s for me. Not just because I grew up with it. I just find that it's entertaining. It's exciting. You look at 90s, look at 2000s. The 70s, yes, they have some great music, some great bands. You got the Beatles in the 60s, I give you that. You have the Bee Gees in the 70s. You also have the Beach Boys in the 60s. So, I give you that. There's some really good bands from the 60s and 70s. But in my opinion, I think
I want to throw another decade in there, the 50s. I thought of the 60s, a lot of evolution, but also the 50s I love because you have the R&B bands and you still have the big band and you still have the hit parade, and it all comes together and rock and roll starts to pop out of that. And you have the great groups that kind of had the beginnings of rock and roll, Overs and the Penguins, and also, there's the element of country music in there, and they all started to come together. And Chuck Berry, where he got a lot of his influences in country, and it evolved into rock and roll. So I love the 50s personally.
Well, see, I like some of the stuff that you said, as in the standards. The big band, which is great. I listen to some of it. There's some that the orchestrating. And the music playing, I'm not really keen on, but I do like some of the big bands. But my vote still goes for the 80s.
Well, I can understand where Maria's coming. Really, I grew up listening to the 50s too. That was my parents' era, so that's where I grew up listening to that music. But I also loved the doo-wops. To me, there's nothing better than good a cappella. But like I said, the 60s, you had the British invasion. You had all the bands coming out. The 70s was more arena rock, but you still had some good bands coming out. And the 80s was good. I mean, I gotta admit that they were good. The 90s, some good stuff for the 90s, but not that I can really follow on.
I'm glad you mentioned doo-wop, Johnny, because I mentioned the R&B, but that's also where doo-wop began, and then it kind of evolved into the 60s, more of an East Coast, West Coast sound, and the Four Seasons and the Beach Boys, but it kind of sort of came out stuff. I love all of it, but it did kind of start maybe for even and 50.
Chris, I know you couldn't make it last week. Do you want to introduce yourself and let us know what decade is your favorite decade? Yours is probably the Headbangers.
Yes, I am DJ Chris Wild. You may recognize me on Monday nights when I'm taking all the rock and heavy metal and shoving it straight up your no-no holes on the Raise the Underground program here on. But I was actually just sitting here listening to everybody, and I wholeheartedly agree to an extent of it's hard to nail down a era for rock and roll music because they all have their greats and their lacks. I were the last true rock and roll and heavy metal, and this is coming from a musician who played the more 90s style of alternative grunge slash musical career. But I really think the late 70s, early 80s, when we had the new wave of British heavy metal coming in, Go Die, and when rock was really truly mainstream, is probably our era of music as far as rock and roll is concerned. However, 80s would not exist without the 50s, 60s, and 70s, and I think it's just a culmination better. And corporate America decided to stick its nose into the music industry, pretty much just.
Julie, what about you?
I like the 70s because when I play Song Quiz on the Echo, I always get all the answers right. Of course, I like the British invasion. That would be obvious. But in the 70s and 80s, that's when songs were really songs. 90s and 2000s, especially today's music, they don't sing anymore. They barely open their mouths, and you don't understand a word they're saying. So I would have to say the 70s and 80s.
See, my brother's 6 years older than I am, and he listened to the Beatles while I was growing up with him and everything. He was listening to all the British bands, the Rolling Stones and all that back then. But even though I grew up listening to that music, yeah, I still fell in love. Sorry, guys, the 80s is...
Oh, no, and it should be. Hey, if you love the 80s, that's cool, man. Hey, see, this is what I like. We're all having a nice round table discussion. I mean, also, what Julie's saying, basically the music was, you could understand it in the 70s and 80s. Well, if you think about it, you could actually understand it in the 40s, 50s, and 60s because everything was phrased just right. And I do agree that now it's all cookie cutter. Curtis, what do you think?
I think the 90s, at least for the R&B, because it was really getting on the map. You had people like Mariah Carey and Whitney Houston, and like Julie said, they really sung and really put a lot of emotion into the song. Rap was kind of coming out and getting known, so I like the 80s, but the 90s is when I really started to pay attention because I was growing up and going through high school and junior high and stuff like that, so that's my decade.
If we add rap into the equation for the best decades for music, then it has to be the 80s because I think was when you had MCs battling the microphone and less about cookie cutter lyrics about Patron and how many girls how much money you have, and you know how generic hip hop is pretty much today, especially with the mumble rappers. But back in the day with Run DMC Boys, Public Enemy and the like, I definitely think the 80s was the era of hip hop as well. So if you add that in the equation, I can't stress enough that the 80s is the decade for music.
And yeah, I got to agree with Chris, man. If we're gonna throw the rap in there, 80s definitely had to be there. I mean, the 80s had the best rap as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, but we're all talking about the 80s. But you, Johnny, and Julie, you guys, even I grew up on country to a certain point. I found the old classic country political. If you notice, a lot of Sam back then, it was more political songs.
Nah, the country music was like, let me see. My wife left me, my dog died, my truck won't start, stuff like that.
Well, what about
Exactly.
Red Foley? Didn't he do This Land Is Your Land? That's what I'm trying to think of political. Just more like on the folk side, talking about the condition of people.
I was going to say that classic country was more about leaving your wife and kicking the dog and taking the truck and drinking tequila. I don't know where you get political from.
You and I had that discussion a while back that, Sam Houston, all these songs from back then.
I think about 80s country bands and country singers. Like one of the first ones that comes to mind is Alabama. And I don't remember ever I remember some great love songs and some great, like, poop kicker, dance around songs like, yeah, if you're going to in the band and all. I'm really outside of somebody like Lee, I can't remember his last name, the one who did in where at least I know I'm free. Like outside of somebody like that, I can't think of anybody that really did a political song in the 80s. I think that more came later.
You're thinking Lee Greenwood. Yeah, I mean, I grew up on the classic country music, so to me, there wasn't really political. Now, when it got to like the 60s, it got more political in some parts, especially of Johnny Cash, because Johnny Cash did a lot of stuff for rights and stuff for people and everything. So yeah, he did a lot of what's the word I'm looking for? I think he did like a lot of kind of protest type stuff. At least
Socially conscious, you mean like Ira Hayes?
Yeah, okay. That's a good thing like that.
And that's very
or
early.
The Man in Black.
And that's very early 70s and late 60s.
And then you had Hank Williams Jr. with You Know What You Can Do With the Change.
Yes, Hank Jr.
Until the days of like Garth Brooks and Alan Jackson and the like. So I don't have as much of an opinion on earlier. I guess that would be considered the 90s country. But like I said, the few that I know, things like Alabama and all, I don't remember a whole 80s, a whole lot of political, but you're right. I guess folk music would probably fall under the banner of country from like the, for lack of better terms. You have your Bob Dylans and your Simon and Garfunkels and all, and they were very, very political, their music.
Well, I wouldn't call Simon and Garfunkel country. Maybe Bob Dylan would be bordering on country sometimes.
The only stuff that Bob Dylan sang country was Lay Lady Lay. Let's not forget, if we're going to talk political, Country Joe and the Fish.
Who?
Country Joe and the Fish. The I'm Just Fixing to Die. I can't play that on the radio. You wouldn't like it.
And Country Pie, I think Bob Dylan did that. I think did one or two types. Definitely political.
The 90s is when I stopped listening to pop music and I went to the new country. I loved the Alan Jacksons, the Toby Keiths, the Travis Tritt, although he was back a little bit, but I love the new country that came out.
Yep, see, I like the 80s with the country with George Strait and the others now out of the 80s. But Alan
Kenny
Jackson.
Rogers.
Kenny Rogers, Dolly Parton. She was 70s as well. So was Kenny Rogers, but I think Kenny Rogers even had a couple in the 60s in it.
Yes, he did with the new edition. What was it? Something's Burning and Ruby Don't Take Your Love to Town.
Yeah, I remember that. I remember those. Like you, MJ, I was listening to country in the 80s. I sort of broke with pop music in the 80s, and I followed my heart, and I went back since then, been in the 50s and 60s mostly, and 70s.
Now, I did hear a rumor, and I just have to bring it up and clarify this, but I think Chris, one of his favorite songs of all time was Achy Breaky Heart.
I will slam you through a table through this program. Don't do that again.
You guys need a referee?
Wait, I thought you liked the Cotton Eye Joe by Rednecks.
No, but the only thing worse than a song by Billy Ray Cyrus is the offspring he created. Okay? I hate everything that has the last name Cyrus created.
Her brother has started to sing too, and the one song of his I heard was terrible.
Sometimes the apple falls far from the tree.
Hey, look. All I know is the newest rumor is Miley freaking Cyrus, Metallica. If that isn't the proof that hell is about to take over Earth, I don't know.
Oh, well, if you haven't heard it, Chris, AC/DC has, what's that song? Shake Me All Night Long. Guess who decided to try to turn it country, Big and Rich?
Oh,
Michael,
you shook me all night wrong.
Michael about died when he heard Big and Rich sing that song. He was like, "You gotta be kidding me."
So that's sort of like Pat Boone doing Smoke on the Water.
And then he sent it to me going, "Oh, you need to check this out." And I checked it out, and I'm just like going, "No, don't ever do that again. No, no, no."
I have to agree.
I mean, you got to figure it's like Pat Boone going, "Yeah, I'm going to do some heavy metal stuff." Yeah, okay, no.
Oh, he did, but it wasn't heavy metal. I listened to it. I actually played it, a little bit of it, as much as I could stand on my show. And yes, it was Smoke on the Water, but
Now, I have to admit, I did like Miley Cyrus's last song. It was, what was it? Something Midnight. That was pretty good.
The one she just did, Midnight Sky?
That's it, Midnight Sky, yes.
Few musicians in this world that can do a cover justice to things. It's even more rare when somebody does an icon than the original. Two people that come to mind right off the bat would be Disturbed, Garfunkel's now I'm going to blank on the song, The Sound of Silence, or on the opposite end of the coin, when covered by the late, great Johnny Cash. Outside of that, it's very rare when you get somebody, especially somebody out actually came from, that will ever sound as good as the.
I agree. Johnny Cash did a nice job on the Nine Inch Nails. I mean, that was, even the video was great. There's not much I can really, I can't say a bad thing about it at all. What about Metallica's cover version of the Bob Seger classic "Turn the Page"?
Well, again, that's surprisingly. I don't know if I can call it better than the original. Like, you can argue Johnny Cash's "Hurt" was better than Nine Inch Nails as a Nine Inch Nails fan. Or Disturbed's cover of Simon and Garfunkel's "Sound of Silence." Even Simon and Garfunkel said it was a better version. But, I mean, I don't know if I can necessarily say Metallica's "Turn the Page" was better than Bob Seger's version.
No, it was not.
It was definitely.
Only Bob Seger can do "Turn the
better.
Page."
Oh, no, I got us version. My biggest pet thing that makes me mad at times is I don't like cover songs that well, but there are some cover songs I do like, and once in a while, I will say I like the cover song. It's the cover song itself, or I like both versions. But normally, like I say, if you want you want something good, listen to
the band Stained or who it was, but they did a cover of Simple Man, and they did it acoustic, all unplugged, and alone. Like, it would have done Leonard Lee proud. I wish I could remember the name of the band that did it.
I think it was Stained, and I heard that version, and I loved it. But I still love Skinner's version.
Sometimes covers are wonderful, and sometimes I think it's wonderful the way one song can just be interpreted in so many different ways.
All right. We had some interesting discussion on that article. We're going to go ahead and get to mine, and I'll kind of give an overview instead of just reading word for word here. So we're going to be talking about the singer from the outfield, Tony Lewis, who passed away suddenly. For those of you who might not know him, he did the song with John Spinks called Your Love, All the Love, and Said It and So. Your Love peaked on the Billboard, number 6 on the U.S. Billboard, and it's still widely known today, and its features in various TV spots and commercials. So, my question to you guys is, do you guys know Tony Lewis, and what did you think about their outfield's music as well as that song Your Love? I love that song.
I was wondering, Curtis, if that's where you got your name from, outfield. They were big in baseball, and there was something else that referred to baseball. And I said to myself, I wonder if this is where Curtis got his name.
Yeah, they actually were, they reformed, they formed again later, the original group, I do believe, and they called themselves the Baseball or something like that, if I remember. And then that's where the outfield came in. When they signed with an American agent, they became the outfielder.
Okay, I didn't realize that. No, I got my name, Curveball, from a best friend in junior high when I first started rapping. But see, that's interesting. How I came to know about the outfield is a few years ago, or when I was hearing the song on the sports show, and I'm like, who is that? I love that song. Looked it up. Oh, it's the outfield. Oh, I'm going to check them out.
I would like to answer because my answer is pretty quick. I was not familiar with Tony Lewis or outfield, so I listened to the songs that were listed in that article. And when I heard, I think a classic 80s power ballad, and his style of singing, just, kind of powerful and direct, and very also distinctive, that kind of a high pitch and power, kind of driven kind of voice. And yeah, I'm sure it did. It's, especially since I haven't been paying that much attention since the 80s and I did know the song, I must have picked it up somewhere in a commercial or something.
Well, it does say that it's used in various spots and commercials. And by the way, his cause of death is still unknown, so we don't know what happened to him, but he was 62 years old.
62 is still too young, in my book. I know little of the Outfield. I've listened to some of their music, especially after I've seen your article, and I will admit, yeah, they had some good music. In fact, this Saturday night, our concert's going to be Outfield and Def Leppard. We're going to, I guess, do like an Outfield concert in tribute to Tony Lewis.
That's awesome, Johnny.
And I forget, who's the one that passed away in 2014 that was part of his band?
If I may, could I throw a suggestion in there, Johnny, for the thing? If you're going to pay trips away, first off, let me just comment on Outfield and all that. Unfortunately, I do not know the band. I don't know the. However, I'm going to go check it out. But also today, 70s and 80s rock band Uriah Heep suffered a. Ken Hensley, their lead vocalist, passed away. So maybe you can get some Uriah Heep into that concert as well to pay tribute for another lost some music.
That's a good idea. That could be for another concert, maybe. Uriah Heep would be good. I know I'd like to find some Billy Joe Shaver and throw some of his stuff in too, because we lost him last week also. But the Outfield, I'm going to listen to some more of that because I might, I might want to check it out. I might want to throw some of my.
Well, I think anybody listening to the podcast who doesn't know the Outfield will definitely want to check into that Saturday night at 9 p.m.
Only on Blind Cafe Radio.
That's
the
exactly,
station that raises Cain.
that's exactly what I was gonna say. I was like, the place to be is on Saturday night is straight from the stage, checking out the Outfield, hearing that song, Your Love.
I did my research on it a little bit. I don't remember some of the names still, but I thought it was cool. Like I said, one of his band members passed away in 2014. He took off of music for a couple years, and his wife got him back into doing music again. And then, of course, he passed away just after.
Yeah, I don't know how long they were married, but he only just found out that his wife was pretty good at writing songs. Now they're collaborating, writing songs together.
Are you talking
Gonna ask
Michael?
it, it's not John Spinks, is it?
It might have been John Spinks that passed away in 2014. It might have been. I don't remember that.
Okay, well, anybody else got any further commentary on this article, or should we move on to Chris?
Looks like Chris is up.
I wish I had more to say, but unfortunately, I'm just not familiar with the band and the music. Like I said, as soon as this podcast is over, I have an interview, my network, to take care of. But after I'm done that, as I'm I'm going to be looking them up and listen to their stuff. So maybe next week I'll have an actual a better answer for you, Curveball. Yeah.
Oh, no problem.
Unfortunately,
I was talking about, just go ahead with your article.
Oh, okay. Well, I don't really have an article. As I told Mike when for this week, I had something that was in a topic of conversation I had with a couple other musicians a couple days ago about how the underground has changed for up and coming artists. And I wanted to get, since it sounds like we have people from all different ages in music, maybe you guys have seen this, where I think it's gotten a lot harder for people to break through, specifically bands, through and get notoriety in today's music scene. When you think of back in the days, like when I was coming up in the music industry, or not in the industry, but you would go to a rock concert, for example, and as you're standing in line to go in to see Motley Crue, for example, by the time you had 15 demos and about 25 flyers in your hand, you could walk into a radio station and hand them your demo. Just word of mouth, going out performing at local bars, clubs, Battle of the Bands, whatever. And then into today, you have none of that. Everything's gone so digital that you don't even have places to live perform. Bands are being replaced by DJs and everything else. That it's just it to me it looks like it's destroyed music scene for a lot of musicians. And I'm curious your guys' take on. Do you agree with that? Have you seen that change, or do you think it's actually better with the
I
musicians to
can
be
tell you
discovered?
there's a Scottish singer. You can barely understand the words he's singing, but his song is absolutely fantastic if you listen to the words. His name is Lewis Capaldi. He was just a bricklayer in construction, and he sang his song, put it on YouTube, and boom, he's had 6 number ones already now. And just by putting it on YouTube. Yet there are people, like you said, especially bands, that cannot make it.
See, and I see where Chris is coming from for the fact that he's right. When you go into clubs or you go into other places that have live music, it's DJs doing all their fancy music in the background. There's no longer drums and guitars, that anymore.
And then not only that, if you throw in the fact that the music industry itself has changed, where now you have digital downloads, so you're not really selling CDs, so you're dependent on show money and the pandemic and all that good stuff. The music industry has definitely changed to where some people might make it off YouTube, like Lewis Capaldi, but some people might be on there forever and not get anything.
I gotta agree with that. I mean, back from when I used to go with my dad when he played in the band. He hasn't played in a couple of years, I believe. But when I used to go with him back in the '90s and help set up, yeah, it was like live music. You had everything in there. And I think the last time I went out, it was like Michael said, it was a DJ, and it didn't feel right. And you got with Chris. By the way, Chris, I want to thank you for giving all the underground music, getting them up and stuff, man. I love that. I try to do that with some of the followers I get on Twitter, the new country stuff like that. I try to play their stuff. But let's face it, the best songwriter that ever did anything has to be Chris Christopherson when he wrote Sunday Morning Coming Down, and he flew a chopper to Johnny Cash's home, landed it on his front lawn, walked up to the front door, knocked on the door, and gave it to Johnny Cash and talked to him about it. That's gutsy right there.
That's wonderful. Because I was thinking today, it's too difficult because it's too easy. I mean, today, he might have just emailed the song to Johnny Cash and it would have gotten lost in a pile of other songs. I mean, I think that maybe it's just too easy to get onto something, say, like YouTube or CD Baby or whatever, and publish your own stuff. But then there's just so much out there that it's got to be difficult. And if, it's just easy to put together an electronic band or just use a keyboard. It's the quality isn't the same, but it's just easier. And so there's just too much of it, it seems.
Yeah, it might be too easy to publish your own stuff or get on SoundCloud or wherever, but just because you get on does not mean that people are going to discover you. It's just like podcasting. I mean, it's easy to get a host and get on all these platforms, but that doesn't mean you're going to be at the top of the cream of the crop.
Also, what about the recordings? Everybody's recording their own stuff from home, and the recording studios, in my opinion, are just falling by the wayside.
Considering how much they charged for these poor up and coming bands that were, footing the bill for their own. I'm not talking about people that had record deals. I'm talking about, people coming out of the garage and wanting to cut it down. Professionally, what they were charging, the one good thing about the digital age is they needed to go by the wayside. They were ripping bands off. But I think, especially for like rock, I don't know necessarily for like, rap bands or whatever else, but for like rock or you need the stage and the interaction with the crowd. That's what really cements you as a musician in that genre. And I think that's a fail with cutting a music video on YouTube as your demo, as opposed to people getting out there and live. To correct one thing, that since we're in a podcast, just for everybody to know, with Raise the Underground, yes, I do promote heavily artists. But just because I mostly play rock and metal does not mean that that's what I'm looking for in underground artists. I will play anybody who sends me a demo. I'm going to give the exposure to the underground artists that I don't think they're. So, just to be fair, if you're a country artist, you're an R&B artist, you're a rapper, send me the demo.
And I think Chris is right about the studios charging them high prices, because I know when I used to rap, they're telling me $300 an hour, and it's like, what? So I can see why people are getting home studios and getting their own equipment, because you come out cheaper in the long run.
And that's what I like about Blind Cafe Radio, though, too, is that you have Rick Rock's Thirsty Thursday. He plays a lot of the 80 rock bands, bands itself, not just the singers, bands. Johnny does the same thing. I have my afternoon shows. Julie has her British Invasion. You have your R&B, earlier R&B, and then you got Maria and everybody here is literally playing bands for the most part. So we do have our newer music. We have our digital music. We have to keep up with the audience there as well. But I think we actually do our part by keeping the bands alive, I would have to say.
One of my favorite things was to go on these independent music sites and find new music like SoundClick, and back in the day when they had mp3.com and IUMA and places like that, and even YouTube. But with YouTube, sometimes it's hard to get a hold of the artist to get permission to play their music.
Well, I definitely like live music because that really showcases the artist's talent or non-talent, because when you're live, you're live. So I love to hear live bands and live music.
I agree with Curtis on that. And that can be for any genre or band, country, rap, rock, classical even. Hey, when you're live, you better do it right, because you start messing up, the audience will pick it up.
All right, guys, we got about 5 minutes left. So any closing comments on the information that Chris brought up or the subject that he brought up before we close it out?
I would just have to say the 80s is still my vote.
70s.
90s.
50s.
60s.
It sounds like we all
music in general.
Yeah. I have to agree
Yay.
with that, Chris.
Oh,
I listen to
man.
Chris's shows. I listen to Julie's, Johnny's, Maria's, Curtis's, and even Tom and Bill that could not be here tonight. I listen to everybody's shows, not just because I'm the station manager, but I really do enjoy music.
And listen to the timeless classics that we have going on during the night sometimes, because he needs to know whether that's going to keep people awake or if it's going to help them to sleep. And Michael has even found an interest in timeless classics.
Sweetness.
Well, I
did
remember
say
last week we talked about opera too, so we're pretty eclectic.
no opera for me.
Oh, opera's really. In fact, yesterday during my country show, I actually played some new country, and I said, this ain't too bad. And right away, Julie's calling me up going, did you just say? She was busting my chops about that and having a good old time, which I kind of laughed because I was having
I have to say, I heard somewhere that if you don't like opera, but even though you don't like opera, you can learn to respect it. That's where I've heard that somewhere.
Hey, look, opera is just heavy metal with a symphonic order. It's true. It sounds jokey. The same vocal harmonics that a lot of opera singers use to project their voice is the same techniques that a lot of heavy metal bands to be able to project their voices to the crowds. And one of the perfect examples I can give of that in the rock industry would be Bruce Dickinson of Iron Maiden. He was always sing like you're trying to reach the people in the back of the auditorium without a microphone.
I'll have to check the Iron Maiden out.
Yeah, I guess you can say opera is like food for the soul. All right, ladies and gentlemen, that wraps up this episode of the Naked DJs podcast. Make sure you check us out, and please give us a rate and review and feedback on the podcast.
Go and check out Blind Cafe Radio at blindcaferadio.com, and also follow us on Twitter at Blind Cafe Radio and on Facebook at Blind Cafe Radio. Make sure you visit our webpage at blindcaferadio.com, where you can visit our naked DJ. And this is the Blind Cafe Kangaroo, signing off.